morning. Welcome back to the Junius Maltby channel. I had to get a late start this morning. I spent the last half hour or so watching the inauguration. A little bit of history there. And speaking of history, that's what we're going to do today. We're going to touch on and take a walk through some historical prices and look at some valuations of human labor and the precious metals that we talk about here on this channel going back to ancient times. So we're going to be all over the place here, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time discussing the minutiae of inflation, the differences between then and now, because obviously there's quite a few differences going back throughout history, and it's difficult to compare the prices of goods and services and commodities from one time to another. There are certain things that remain somewhat constant, but this is going to be for our own thoughts and even entertainment purposes. But it's good to look back and see where precious metals have been and different things that have happened throughout history. I don't think that adage ever gets old, that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. But looking at today, we've got metals all in the green, up a little bit today. And the article that we're going to mainly be discussing, there's several, but the bulk of this comes from Commodity Headquarters, CommodityHQ.com. They did put a pretty good scholarly piece together here. So looking at ancient prices, and I just talked about this briefly, but before delving into the discussion of silver's historical value, a few starting points are important to understand. First, it's difficult to compare modern and ancient labor, as much of the labor in ancient times was performed by slaves. Secondly, the translation of laborer or craftsman into modern terms is imprecise at best. The same goes for concepts such as the length of a normal workday. In the same vein, prices can be skewed by the more primitive state of trade. Modern conveniences like wine and spices were quite expensive in medieval England, but part of that is due to the fact that they weren't produced in England, and long trade routes and/or wars took their toll on prices. So there's a lot of stuff you could talk about just in that one opening paragraph. I mean, we had major piracy, and you can imagine what kind of things would happen on trade routes back in the day. Theft, lost goods. I mean, you hear about shipwrecks today. Imagine the impact that would have on the prices of certain commodities when an entire shipload of cinnamon sank somewhere in the Indian Ocean. That would drive down the supply and increase of demand, and prices would go crazy. You can imagine, I mean, the spice trade alone, just what would take place back then. Also on the point of the length of a workday, how much has that evolved and changed over time? Going back to ancient Babylon, we know that workers earned the equivalent of about 2.1 grams of silver per day, approximately 1/15 of an ounce, or a little more than $2 in today's silver prices. At that time, the price of a sheep ranged from 2.6 grams to 16 grams of silver, or about $2 to $16 in today's prices, which compares to recent prices of about $90 to $120. Apparently, it was better to be a laborer in ancient Greece, as typical wages were about 1 Attic drachma, 4.3 grams of silver, in the 5th century, and about 2.5 drachmae by 377. In the 5th century, a drachma would buy you approximately 3 kilograms of olive oil, and 3 drachmae would buy you a medimnos of wheat, or about 54 liters. While the price of that medimnos climbed to 5 drachmae by the 4th century, a day's labor would still buy approximately 2 weeks' worth of food for one person, if they lived on bread alone. But man cannot live on bread alone. The Romans may have brought many valuable inventions to the world, but debasement and serious inflation are inventions that humanity probably could have done without. Although the Roman day wage of 1.2 denarii, or 4.2 grams of silver, was consistent with wages during the time of the Greeks, there was huge inflation and debasement from the time of Nero through Diocletian and beyond, as the Romans gutted the silver content of the denarius from 3.5 grams of 98% silver to 3.4 grams of 94% silver, on down to 40% and then almost nothing. The price of a measure of wheat soared by 15,000 times over about 250 years. And we've talked about inflation and what took place during the Roman Empire. I've got, I think, 2 videos that touch on that, one of them more in depth than the other. But obviously, it got really bad, disrupted trade routes, people stopped selling goods, moving goods, and they had little bronze coins coated with silver, and then they didn't even bother to coat them with silver anymore, they were just bronze. During the medieval times, while the medieval period saw a pronounced increase in trade and the growth of cities, it was also marked by wars and plagues that significantly depopulated large swaths of Europe. In many cases, depopulation led to pressures for higher wages, and the nobility often fought back with wage controls. Around 1300 AD, a laborer in England could expect to earn about £2 sterling in a year, or about 672 grams of silver, approximately 2.1 grams of silver per day, given the different work week of medieval times. Likewise, we know a Thatcher in 1261 could look to earn about 2 pennies a day, or 2.8 grams of silver. Thatcher's pay increased to about 3 pence, approximately 4.2 grams of silver, in 1341, 4 pence in 1381, and 6 pence in 1481. Along the way, a city craftsman could look to earn about 4 pence a day in the 1350s. So what would those wages buy? In the early 14th century, wine cost between 3 pence and 10 pence per gallon in England, and 2 dozen eggs could be had for 1 pence. Sometime later, an axe cost about 5 pence in mid-15th century England, while wheat cost approximately 0.2 grams of silver per liter, not much different than the per liter price in ancient Greece. You have to also imagine this was pre-industrial revolution, and that axe was hand-fashioned. The handle would have been hand-carved, hand-fitted. A blacksmith would have had to forge and pound out and fashion the head of the axe, and that would have taken quite a bit of time and labor for the craftsman known as the blacksmith, as well as the materials that it was comprised of, which were extremely difficult to forge out and extract during those times, being iron. The Industrial Age. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the use of paper money was increasingly common, alongside silver and gold coins. What's more, the price of gold and silver were increasingly fixed and stable for long stretches of time. Sir Isaac Newton fixed the price of gold in 1717, and it pretty well stayed at that price, excluding the years of the Napoleonic Wars, until World War I. So it's the 300-year anniversary of Sir Isaac Newton fixing the price of gold in 1717. Likewise, the price of silver more or less stayed at $1.30 per ounce from the founding of the United States through the Civil War. Prices were exceptionally turbulent during the Civil War, rising to nearly $3 an ounce, and stayed above $1.30 an ounce until the late 1870s. I'm going to interject here. During that time, that's not mentioned here, 1870s, the Pikes Peak silver lode was discovered. A lot of silver out west was discovered, and that's when you saw an explosion in silver production and silver supply here in the United States. If you look at the mint populations for those early first-year Morgan dollars, unbelievable. 1878, the 1879 mint populations for Morgan dollars was pretty high. I might even look them up real quick before I put this video out and pop those mint populations in there. I did read on that. About 10 years ago I found an article, scholarly article, on that time period in the US, and those explosions in silver supply actually drove the value of the dollar down somewhat because there was so much silver. And it created kind of a trade imbalance internationally as far as silver versus gold. There were silver shortages in other parts of the world. And so America was, in a way, swapping silver for gold. Prices generally declined through the latter years of the 19th century, dipping below 60 cents an ounce in 1897, mostly hovering in the 50s through World War I, from a low of about 25 cents an ounce in 1932. Silver generally climbed thereafter, moving to above 70 cents an ounce after World War II, past 80 cents an ounce in 1950, and crossing $1 an ounce in 1960. Silver jumped alongside gold throughout the 1970s and spiked to $50 an ounce in January of 1980 as the Hunt brothers, Nelson and William, manipulated silver in an attempt to corner the market. Silver crashed shortly thereafter, hitting $8 in 1981, $6 in 1986, and dropping below $4 in the early 1990s. I remember those dates, and I remember buying silver ounces for less than $4 an ounce. In the early 90s, when I would get paid for some work as a youth, I would buy Silver Eagles, Morgans, but I remember vividly buying a silver Eagles in the $6 to $7 range routinely, even $5.50, $6. So those were definitely good times to be buying Silver Eagles. Silver has since rallied through the late 90s and the first decade of the 21st century, currently sitting about $33 an ounce. This is an old article. It is not sitting at $33 an ounce at the time of this article. It was, but today we're sitting around $16, $17 an ounce. So we're about half of what it was when this article was written, and definitely a good time, in my opinion, to pick up some silver. Tracing the path of wages, the average wage was approximately $1 per day in the latter part of the 19th century, or approximately 25 grams of silver. In 1914, when Henry Ford revolutionized the auto industry and how companies viewed wages, offering $5 a day, about 10 ounces of silver, the average daily wage was $2.34 per day. Imagine getting paid 10 ounces of silver per day right now. That would be about $170. That's like $17 an hour. That's not bad for, now that Henry Ford era, that was before major unions, that was before minimum wage laws, and here you had an industrial capitalist paying his workers, the highest wage in the land. When federal minimum wages began in 1938, the nominal value of those wages were about $2 per day, or more than 4.5 ounces. So if minimum wage in 1938, let's talk about that for a moment, was about 4.5 ounces. It says more than 4.5 ounces. Let's just call it 5 for easy math. That's close to about $80 per day. So if we have an 8-hour work day, these people are making $10 an hour and minimum wage standards back in 1938. Now I don't know if those were 8-hour work days, 10-hour work days, or what, but it's about $76.50, close to $80 a day is what individuals were being paid per the minimum wage back then. Now those wages climbed to about $16 per day in 1974, or about 3.6 ounces of silver, to $58 today, or about 1.75 ounces of silver. So in silver, the minimum wage has dropped over the course of the last century. Said differently, today's minimum wage buys about 13 times the amount of silver. Now said differently, today's minimum wage buys about 13 times the amount of silver that the average daily wage in ancient Greece would have bought. Now I threw this in here, this nice little image of a Morgan dollar, and you can see there the weight, and its weight in pure silver, because obviously they're 90%, they contain decimal 7734. So decimal 77, a little over 3/4 of an ounce of fine silver would be in your dollar, your US dollar at the time. And again, interjection, there is a video, the dollar, the history and origins of the word. That's another video on this channel if you want to go back and learn more about where the word dollar comes from and why the dollar is the approximate size that it is and the weight that it is. We did do a video on that in the past. The history of what things cost in America, 1776 to today. So this is going to be a little more specific on the topic of what things cost in America going back to the Revolutionary period. In 1776, 1 ton of iron cost $63.73. Philadelphia, 1775. I don't know what a ton of iron would cost today, but back then, $63.73. 20 gallons of orange peel cordial cost £3. 1 checkerboard with pieces, 2 shillings, 6 pence. A double-barreled gun cost £3. 1 pound of coffee cost 0.13 silver dollars, so a little more than a dime. We'll just say a dime and 3 pennies, 13 cents approximately. $1 in 1775 was approximately $29 today. In 1800, a dictionary cost 50 cents, 12-volume encyclopedia, $20, 1 chest of drawers, $2. Let's go back 1 second. A 12-volume encyclopedia would cost an ounce of gold, close to an ounce of gold, a $20 gold piece. So that's a lot of money for 12 books. But again, back then, that's all you had. It was to have a library, to have nice bound books, to have them, because books were bound by hand. It was difficult to make, and there was some quality and workmanship that went into them. Now, it was a prestigious thing. You had to be someone of means to have, a bookcase, to have some knowledge in your home. It was valued, and people had definitely a different set of values and a different viewpoint on education and on books and learning than people do today, I would think. 1 cow cost $10. Now, I do know a little bit about cattle costs today because I have friends that raise cattle, ranchers and farmers. And a cow, depending a steer today based on cow prices, I don't know what the difference is there. Is this a milk cow? Is this a full-grown heifer that can have a calf that year? Or is it just a yearling? It's going to depend on the weight. So there's a lot of variables to that. But, today, a steer going for slaughter, less than a year old, is about $700 to $800, and that price varies. But total cost to build the president's house for South Carolina College was $8,000, and a pound of coffee was a quarter, 25 cents. I like talking about things valued in quarters because people are familiar with a quarter. And, if you look at, we've talked about this before also, the price of gasoline priced in silver quarters going back pre-1964, they seem to, a quarter always seemed to be able to buy a gallon of gas based on its silver value. So it's kind of interesting to see, coffee. Obviously, coffee changed over time. I think more people are probably drinking coffee today than back then. So demand is definitely up on coffee, but I would also imagine supply has increased, more production, more demand, and also modern agricultural techniques have increased production in coffee, and modern transportation has also made the transportation of coffee much easier than it used to be back in 1800. Imagine coffee having to go from the tropical regions that it's grown in on a ship, as you see pictured there most likely, and traveling across the high seas and traded. And the dollar back in 1800 is about $17.60 today. Now, 1825, 10 pounds of sugar cost around 20 cents. An acre in a tract of land of over 400 acres cost $2. And that was in Sumter, South Carolina, 1823. A bushel of potatoes, 12 cents. A set of blue china, $8. 1 cow cost $12. Pound of coffee, 17 cents. $1 in 1825, $22.40 today. 1850, a bottle of port cost 11 cents. Piano, $195. A routine doctor's visit, $2. A new home in Brooklyn, New York, cost $2,500. 1 pound of coffee costs about 80 cents. 1875, a necktie designed to supersede all other methods for fastening the bow to a turn-down collar, cost 10 cents. A dozen pairs of Levi Strauss blue jeans, $13.50. So a pair of blue jeans cost around $1, just a little over $1. One pair of shoes, 98 cents. One suit cost $10. So again, that's a suit for about half of an ounce of gold. That would be about $600 today. You could go out and buy a decent suit for $600 today. One opera ticket for The Marriage of Figaro costs $1. So $1 today. Again, that's going to be some silver, so we're talking 16, 15, 16 bucks for a ticket. $1 in 1875 worth $20. 1900, tooth soap, 25 cents. Board at Clemson College for 40 weeks, $59. I don't think you can board at any college for $59 a day now. A home on Flatbush Avenue in Brooklyn, New York, $7,000 to $12,000. This is 1901. An Oldsmobile, $650. A pound of coffee, 15 cents. $1 in 1900 was worth about $26.40 today. 1925. Total annual cost of Cornell University, including living expenses, was $1,400. A Harley-Davidson motorcycle, $235. A Camry, $80. A Chrysler Imperial sedan, $29.95. $2,995. 1 pound of coffee, 47 cents. $1 in 1925. $12.20 today. 1950. The Monopoly game cost $4. A bottle of aspirin, 54 cents. A Chevy Corvette, $3,000. One-way flight from New York to California, 88 bucks. A pound of coffee, 79 cents. $1 in 1950 equaled about $8.91 today. 1975, an Apple II computer cost $1,300. A 6-pack of beer cost $1.49. A microwave cost $168. A movie ticket, $1. 1 pound of coffee, $1.40. $1 in 1975 was worth about $3.98 today. 2000, a 12-pack of Bud Light bottles cost $8.99. A Samsung 42-inch television cost $1,000, about $8.99 anyways. One movie ticket in Chicago, $7.50. A year's tuition at St. John's College, $30,570. A pound of coffee, $3.54. $1 in 2000 equals $1.25 today. And here's some charts looking back historically on some of the metals we discuss here. 1792 to 2011 nominal silver price per troy ounce. See it flat there from about 1800 all the way there to 1850. Bumps up a little bit, comes down a little bit, 1900 still flat, and then you see the modern era as the nominal price of silver tended to rise there. Price of 1 ounce fine silver bullion, January 1880, December 2015. So you can see it dipping there from January 1880 all the way down to about right after 1912 there, and then it starts to pick up a little bit, bottoming there about 1932, and then rising from that point forward. And remember what we talked about earlier in the video, right there at the beginning of the chart, 1880 is when there was that extreme expansion in silver supply here in the United States, and that's, I would imagine, why you see that decline in silver price there. They basically hit the mother lode out west. We had this whole frontier full of precious metals, everything from Colorado down to Mexico up to Canada, and that whole front there, all those mountains were just packed full of good precious metals, and they were really getting after it, getting those metals out, copper, silver, gold. And down in Colorado, the silver lode was unbelievable. So a lot of those Morgan dollars you have, if you read about them, a lot of that silver came out of Colorado at that time. Here we have a consumer price index, United States, 1775 to 2012. So the creation of the Federal Reserve's there in 1913, and you can see what happens to the CPI after that. So from the Revolutionary War all the way up through to the creation of the Fed, we have a pretty somewhat stable consumer price index. This is from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, Historical Statistics of the United States. And then there it is, exploding, CPI. And we'll finish it off with a gold price chart going back all the way to like 1792, back when the U.S. Coinage Act was first drafted. And there you have it. Somewhat stable gold prices, a couple hiccups here and there. And then, well, we've talked about the history of gold on this channel quite a bit. So most of you are, I'm sure, familiar with some of these benchmark dates. There's the price of gold just blowing up. All right, thank you for being part of today's little historical discussion, looking back in time at the prices of goods and services and the different fluctuations in price in metals. Thank you for participating and being part of the Junius Maltby channel. Don't forget the channel coin for all of us out there, all of you that have been members of this channel going back to 2013. We met our goal, and they are taking pre-orders there at QSB, QualitySilverBullion.com. You can now order the Junius Maltby channel coin. So take a look at that. There's links in past videos, and you can definitely do a search on their site and find the coin easily and do your pre-orders to be shipped out next month in February. Thank you all for being part of the channel and for your continued encouragement and motivation. Have a good day.
Gold is a protection.
Do you think gold is money?
No.
It's not money. Even if it has been money for 6,000 years, somebody reversed that and eliminated that economic law.
Well, it's an asset. I mean, it's the same. Would you say Treasury bills are money? I don't think they're money either, but they're financial
Why do
asset.
central banks hold it?
Well, it's a
not
form of
money.
reserves.
Why don't they hold diamonds?
Well, it's tradition, long-term tradition.
You know, some people still think it's money. I yield back. My time is up. Thank you.